Hello and welcome back to part 6 of the Quiltmania Mystery Block of the Month for 2018. We're almost at the finish now, so we're going to look at how to do the border treatment this month. So this is what we've done. We've used the special mystery fabric, the blue one here that we did use in part 4. We're also going to add a row of hexagons to the edge of the curve. To see how it looks, you'll have to follow me through the next couple of steps. Let's see what happens next. First of all, we're going to attach the border fabric to the quilt top. We need to cut a border 8 inches wide by the full length of the 2 meters that you have in this month's installment. We're going to firstly draw ourselves a solid line with a dark pencil, or maybe even lightly with a permanent pen. One line 3 1/4 inches from the edge of the inside of the quilt surface. See how we've got it here? So here's the edge and here's the line. This piece of fabric will slide under the quilt itself, the quilt top. We need to find halfway the center of the quilt and the border. And once we've pinned that in place, we will then go along and pin all the way down along our length. This will hold it nice and flat, so make sure you do this on a solid surface. A tabletop would be really good. I've threaded a needle with some very contrast thread, so I'm using a dark brown on my cream, and I'm going to baste along the outside edge and the inside edge. So this will just give us a foundation to work on as we're going. I'll go all the way along about 1/4 inch from the edge of the fabric. And then we'll be ready for the next step. Once you've finished doing the basting on the back of the quilt and you've basted all 4 borders together, we're going to move on to the mitered corners. And we're going to do the miter on the front before we do the applique to form the curve that's going to make the edge of the quilt. So I've laid it down flat and I've worked out where my miter will sit, making sure that it's at a lovely 45-degree angle through here. I've pinned it all in place, and then using a matching thread this time with a knot in the end, or a coloured thread that blends in quite nicely, we're going to start appliquing 1/2 inch in from this corner here. Okay, so 1/2 inch in from the corner, and we're going to do a very fine blind hem. I like to do this when I'm doing large borders like this, especially when we're going to move on and do some more work on the border as we go. So you will continue appliquing that down all the way along until you come to the end, and then repeat that 4 times so that we've got all our corners done before we move on. Having created the miters on the right side of the quilt, we're now going to turn it back to the wrong side. We're going to now mark with a pencil our curved line to work our applique section. The first thing to do is to draw, to find the location of the stars, and place a little marking onto the cream fabric like that, and then where the 2 star blocks join together here, make a little marking here, and continue like that completely around the quilt. So these give you small clues to making the curve fit evenly into the space that you have. The next thing we need to do is to make a template. Now I've made this template using a violin, slightly stiff, but you could use paper, freezer paper, greaseproof paper, anything that you have. I've used this to create the curves, and you'll find a template for this in the magazine this month. Placing the template on where the little marks were that I made, I'll be able to now draw my curve with a pencil all the way along like that, and that will give me my line to make my applique. We go into the corner here, there's the corner of my stitching, my border, so I'll come into here with the line, and then I'll carefully lift this over and face the other direction and come back so that it all lines up again. So here we have the little marking and the corner, and I'll draw with the pencil the line so that I can see where it is. So there we go. So that's the template, and we're going to do that the whole way around. Draw the line first. Now going back to that contrast thread like we used earlier, we're going to do some small stitches through all of the layers. So I'm stitching through the white right through to the blue, and this will be used for our applique line on the front using a bit of a back basting technique. So see, I'm just going to do small stitches all the way around, pull them through. Don't put a knot in this one because it's a little trickier to pull out, and then continue as we're going, small stitches until you have completed the entire way around the quilt. So I know you can't see it as clearly as I can, but I now have a row of stitches that are showing through onto the blue surface here as well as the back. Now we're going to do something else. We're ready now for the curved border. So we're going to use some scissors and carefully cut a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way along the edge of the basting stitch that we put in place before. I've gently snipped through the other basting line that we'd put on the edge of the fabric so that we can lift this back and out of the way. Don't do too much at once the first couple of times, just do a little bit at a time. I've just pinned this back out of the way so that we can see what's happening next. I've threaded a needle and I'm going to applique this down with a matching thread or a thread that blends very nicely. And we're going to use the tip of our needle to roll back the edge of the fabric and do an applique stitch. So try and do small stitches, not too large. You can see as I'm stitching here that the top of our curve sits on the seam allowance from before. As I'm going along, I'm going to just unpick some of the basting threads, and that will give me a little bit more to stitch with. There we go, and I can roll back. I can see those nice perforations that we've made with the thread with the basting. So continue like that and undo the basting as you go. Just a little bit, just do a little bit at a time. The perforation will show on the white fabric as well as the blue floral. Okay, so when we've gone past the top set of bastings, we can pull those out gently too. I've left all the bottom row of basting in place until we're ready for it. So here we go, we can lay it down and you can see where it runs. So it runs level with the seam, and this area here is 1.5 inches from the point of the star block to the edge of the curve, the bottom edge of the curve. The next thing we're going to do is work out how we're going to get the hexagons in place. Now for the hexagons. The hexagons sit along the edge of the border here and are appliqued down. But to start with, we need to make 300 of these hexagons. You may need a few more, just depends on your distance that you stitch them on, but you might need a few less too. But we're aiming for 300. I've put these together with a slip stitch on the back rather than gluing them in place. This way they'll be easier to pull out when we're finished rather than undoing the glue. I've covered the papers and then I've used a product like Best Press or a spray starch of your choice, and I've taken them to the ironing board and sprayed them, and put so that they form a nice firm surface. We're going to join them together then to form what I call a string of pearls. So all the hexagons are evenly spaced and we know how they are. We've also done them in groups of 20, so that makes it a little easier to count. Now I'm going to get some thread and put the two right sides together like this and stitch. I'll put the knot up through here into the back there, and I'm going to stitch just the very tip of the point, so just like this, through there, and a second one. You could do a little locking knot if you want to, just to make sure they don't come undone. Then the next thing I'm going to do is attach another one. So I'm going to get two right sides together, and I'm going to pull the thread across the back up to that point again. So I'm going through the top point like that, and then make a little locking knot and pull through. So now I've got two together to make the three in a row. Then you would continue like that, pulling them up to connect the group together to make 20. And go through the top there like that, and through again, making a little locking knot, and finish. Just to make sure I don't have that as a loose thread, I'm going to snip it off over to the side. So there we go, we've got our group of 20. You could give them another press if you like, just to make sure that they're still flat after being handled, but I think they're good as they are. So we've still got our thread here, put it aside. We're also going to pull the paper out at that point so that they are ready to applique in place. I'm going to carefully put this down flat. I like to do it on an ironing board, but you can do it on a table surface. The next thing I'm going to use is a liquid glue, something maybe like Roxanne's Glue Based It. That works well for me. I've got an end here that I've already appliqued down this group. I need to put more onto the end there. So let's just get that needle back. Put a little knot in the end. And right sides together, make sure that they are the ones that intersect at the corner there. Put them down and do that stitch across again so that we've got those joined together. And then they're ready to be glued in place. There we go. And snip off. Put that aside. Now the Roxanne's glue does set quicker if you use an iron on it just to heat the surface. Now I'm using a little tool here that has a 1/4 inch line in the middle. So that will give me the distance between the blue border and the hexagons. So just gluing a couple at a time, I put a tiny bit of glue into the background, maybe 2 or 3 dots. 3 is probably better than 2 because it will give you a nice anchor. And then we're going to carefully lay them in place as a guide. The liquid glue gives you the opportunity to adjust them once they are in place. So I'm going to make them run straight with the edge of the hexagon along the edge of the blue fabric. Okay, so that's going to do that all the way around the quilt to make them evenly spaced onto the surface. I think that was the last one I did, yes. So if you were at the ironing board, you could now put a little bit of heat on top of that, and that would just set the glue in place. Continue like that until you've gone all the way around. When you get to joining the two last ends, you may need to adjust the angle of the curve a little to make sure that they line up along the same edge. The next thing I do is to stitch them in place. It's an applique stitch again, but this time the corners are all done for us, the edges, so it's not needle turn applique, it is simply applique. And what I have done on this one is I have stitched all the top edge, so I would have come up through here first and stitched this top surface in place, and I've done that all the way around on one direction. And then see how these ones are loose on the bottom, so I have come all the way on the top edge, and then when I've done that I turn them around and I go back and stitch the other three sides down. That means you don't have to keep twisting and turning your work as you're going along. So that's the hexagon section, and I'll be finishing mine off very soon, and the finished quilt will be heading off to the quilter before you know it. Adding the hexagons to the final border is the last stage of the Quilt Mania mystery quilt for this year. Hopefully you've enjoyed the process. Mine's almost finished, as you can see by the video today, and as soon as I have, it'll be heading off to the quilter. I can't wait to see your quilts when you have them finished and quilted, and look forward to you posting them on our Facebook page. That's all from me, and I hope you've enjoyed the process this year of the Quilt Mania Mystery Project for 2018. Goodbye for now.